Amen. So we're finishing up Ecclesiastes chapter number 4 this evening, and I'll kind of sum up the chapter for you at the end. But we're starting in verse number 13. So we looked so far, there was two themes that we looked at so far in Ecclesiastes chapter number 4. The first theme was kind of, there's travail, right? Even if you do right work in this life, travail is coming to you, and many times travail will come to you because you're doing right work, because people are envious of that right work. So travail comes with the territory. And the second theme was, it's not, doesn't make any sense to, just be working just for yourself. I mean, it's better to have relationships in this life. It's better to have friendships, and, that's why, we get married. And I was talking with some, that doesn't mean that, like, if you're not married that you're like, have no purpose in life, all right? That's not what that's not what it's saying. But it's saying, like, relationships are important in life. Those are worthy things, right? So doing the right work is a worthy thing. Having good relationships is a worthy thing. There's going to be travail throughout all of that. And then in verse number 13, we get kind of another shift in themes here. It all kind of paints to the same picture, but let's look at verse 13 through the end of the chapter here, especially verse number 13 and verse number 14. There's kind of this new analogy put forth. All right, in verse number 13 of Ecclesiastes chapter number 4, the Bible says, "Better is a poor and wise child than an old and foolish king, who will no more be admonished." All right, so the Bible here is saying, and if I was going to title the sermon, I guess the theme of these next few verses is the old and foolish king. All right, the old and foolish king. So the Bible is saying it's better to be a poor and wise child than an old and foolish king that won't listen to anybody, that won't take advice, won't take counsel. So what does that mean, right? Look at verse number 14. It kind of continues this thought. And verse number 14 is kind of, I never do this, but I actually went back to like how the Hebrew reads. There's some italics in verse number 4, which means typically that they added those words in the English translation in order to kind of make the Hebrew, what they said in Hebrew, make grammatical sense in English. So I actually went back to what the Hebrew was without what the Hebrew would have read in English without the italics. And that's kind of gives us a clue on what this means here. It says, "For out of the prison he cometh to reign, whereas also he that is born in his kingdom becometh poor." All right, so the first part of this verse is pretty easy to understand. You can't really misunderstand it, right? It's saying, "For out of prison he cometh to reign." Who's he? We're talking about this old and foolish king. All right, so it's saying out of prison he cometh to reign. This is talking about maybe this king rises to power. Maybe he rises to power out of nowhere, right? Maybe he comes to power from the lowest estate, all right? And you say, well, how that can't be possible. Oh yeah, we'll turn to Genesis 41. Turn to Genesis chapter number 41, and the Bible actually has an exact example of, someone like literally, coming out of prison to reign, okay? And that, of course, is the story of Joseph. All right, look at verse number 42 of Genesis chapter number 41. Right, "For out of prison he cometh to reign." It's just talking about this old and foolish king. So he's this king, and he won't be admonished anymore. Like, it sounds like he used to be admonished, but now he won't. Now that he's old, he's got it all figured out, and he's set in his ways. And unfortunately, this is kind of a pattern that we can see as people get older. They get more set in their ways. They get less easily, admonished and, corrected, I guess is what you could say. All right. Look at verse 42 of Genesis 41. It says, "And Pharaoh took off his ring." So this, of course, Joseph was in prison. Pharaoh had this dream. And Joseph was, of course, he interpreted two people's dreams that were in the prison. And, of course, they abandoned him. But they finally remembered Joseph. And Joseph interprets the dream for Pharaoh. And Pharaoh took the ring off his hand and put it on Joseph's hand and arrayed him in vestures of fine linen and put a gold chain about his neck. Look, he was just in prison. Just a few verses, just a little while ago, he was in prison, and he made him to ride in the second chariot which he had, and they cried before him, bow the knee, and made him ruler over all the land of Egypt. He basically became the king of Egypt, all right? He became the ruler for Pharaoh. And Pharaoh said unto Joseph, "I am Pharaoh, and without thee shall no man lift up his hand or foot in all the land of Egypt." And Pharaoh called Joseph's name Zapharnath-Paneah, and gave him to wife Asenath, the daughter of Potiphera, priest of On. And Joseph went out over all the land of Egypt. And Joseph was 30 years old when he stood before Pharaoh, king of Egypt. And Joseph went out from the presence of Pharaoh and went throughout all the land of Egypt. So this is a story where somebody literally went from prison to basically having the power of a king. And that's what these verses are talking about from verse 13 to verse 16. It's not necessarily talking about a king. It's talking about any kind of power, any kind of position in this world. So it's saying, so far in verse 13, we see it's better to be a nobody without any power than to be this prideful and foolish king, person, whatever it is, with all the power. All right, that's the contrast in verse 13. And then in verse 14, it goes on to talk about the foolish king, and it says that the foolish king could have come out of prison to be the king, and then it says the foolish king basically will make everyone poor, is what it says. Like everyone, even people that were born into the privilege of that kingdom. So it's kind of like showing, a rise to a king, and then people that were privileged in maybe like a royalty in that kingdom or whatever can be brought to poor because of the king. All right, but it's really showing, either way, it's showing like power is fleeting. Like this worldly power is fleeting. All right, now look at verse 15. Now he kind of introduces a new thought here, still in the context of a king. All right, he says, I considered all the living, which, you have to remember, who's writing this too? Like, it's a king, right? It's a king that has not really done the wise things in his life. And it's not because he wasn't wise, it's because he was not admonished, and he did not listen to counsel, and he just kind of did what he wanted to do. Now look at verse 15. He says, I considered all the living which walk under the sun. What does that mean? All the living which walk under the sun. He considered everybody, all right? With the second child that shall stand up in his stead. So now this king, what he's talking about, the second child that will stand up in his stead, you have to kind of remember the wording of the middle of the chapter where it says, when it was talking about being alone and there is no second, nor is there a brother. I believe that's exactly how it was worded. What he's talking about is the child of the king. Okay? So he's talking about the second child that shall stand up in his stead. What he's talking about is the next king or the prince in verse 15. Now look at verse 16. He says, there is no end of all the people, even of all that have been before them. They also, so there's going to be all these people, and even of all of them that have been before them, they also that come after shall not rejoice in him. In him who? The present king right now. So what he's saying is that all these people, there's going to be this new prince that comes, and this prince is going to take power, and basically all the people are going to follow the new king, and they're not even going to think about the last king. And it's just going to be over for that last king. Again, showing the fleeting nature of power, of worldly, earthly power. And that, he says that exact same thing here in the last verse where he says, surely this also is vanity and vexation of spirit. He's like, it's vexing to me when I think about that my son is going to take over and no one's even going to remember like who I was. No one's going to care about the king previously, and they will just follow the new king, and they probably won't even remember the old, or they definitely won't rejoice in the old, especially if he was a foolish king. All right? So there's a couple lessons that we need to, I'm just going to give you 3 points from these verses here. The first point is, like, being a king, and again, we're like, there's no king in America. How could I apply this? We're talking about positions of power, positions of authority. All right? The first point of these last few verses is that being in a position of authority or being the king doesn't make you wise. Just because somebody's the king or just because somebody's in a position of authority, it's not like you're automatically wise. Like probably the most basic position of authority you could think about, like in a family, would be like a husband. Just getting married doesn't all of a sudden make you wise, young man. And this is a powerful lesson for young men, actually. And here's what's interesting and ironic about this verse. Turn to 1 Kings chapter number 12. Being a king doesn't make you wise. You don't have to read too far in the Bible, in the historical books, to realize that there were plenty of stupid and foolish kings. But probably the one that, if you just had to pick a story of a foolish king in the Bible, what would be the most standout story that you could possibly think about as far as one king making a stupid and foolish decision? And you know what the irony is? It is the son of Solomon. Look at 1 Kings chapter number 12 and look at verse number 1. Rehoboam. The Bible says in Rehoboam, this is the son of Solomon. This is the prince. He went to Shechem, for all Israel were come to Shechem to make him king. Now we're talking about the United Kingdom right here. All right? And it came to pass when Jeroboam, so here you got this kind of this leader that's kind of popped up in Israel, and he's skeptical of the new king. He came to pass when Jeroboam, the son of Nebat, who was yet in Egypt, heard of it, for he was fled from the presence of King Solomon, and Jeroboam dwelt in Egypt, that they sent and called him. And Jeroboam and all the congregation of Israel came and spake unto Rehoboam, saying, Thy father made our yoke grieveth. You know what these people are doing right now? They got the new prince, they got the second child that's in charge right now, and you know what? They're not rejoicing in the father. They had problems with the way the father was doing. As a matter of fact, what happened to those people because of that old and foolish king? They became poor. They were brought low because of what Solomon did. Right? He said he made our yoke grievous. What that means is like he taxed us to the point where we're all broke. He worked us to the point where we're all broke. He took all of our, whatever that means. He made our yoke grievous. These people were not prospering. People say you vote your economy. These people's economy was not good. All right? Now therefore make thou the grievous service of thy father and his heavy yoke which he put upon us lighter, and we will serve thee. They're like, hey, don't require so much of us. Don't require so much of us. I imagine he was taking too much % of their crops to where they couldn't save anything or they couldn't feed their families or whatever it is. It's like in his heavy yoke which he put us, I'm sure he was taxing their incomes to the point where they couldn't survive. They said, hey, lighten up on this stuff and we will accept you. All right? Now, jump down a couple more verses. So what happens is, let me just sum up the story for you. Rehoboam goes and he seeks the counsel of the old men that counseled his father. All right? The counsel that his father many times probably didn't take. And guess what? Rehoboam also goes to his buddies, to his bros for advice, and he takes their advice. He shuns the counsel, the wise counsel of the old men, and his buddies tell him, hey, no. The old men are like, yes, do it. Make the yoke lighter. Listen to the people, is what the old men said. And his buddies are like, no, you tell them, you show them how it is. You go and drop the hammer on those people. And look at verse 13. The king answered the people roughly and forsook the old men's counsel that they gave him. And spake to them after the counsel of the young men, saying, my father made your yoke heavy, and I will add to your yoke. Just like, what in the world? My father also chastised you with whips. I will chastise you with scorpions. I mean, if you're going to pick out one of the foolish kings of the Bible, I mean, he's got to lead the club right here. Wherefore the king hearkened not unto the people, for the cause was from the Lord, that he might perform this saying, which the Lord spake by Ahijah the Shilonite unto Jeroboam the son of Nebat. God saw this coming. So when all Israel saw that the king hearkened not unto them, the people answered the king, saying, what portion have we in David? Neither have we inheritance of the son of Jesse. To your tents, O Israel. Now see to thine own house, David. So Israel departed to their tents. And from this point forward, you have the northern kingdom of Israel with the 10 tribes, and then you have the lower kingdom of Judah. This idiot took the kingdom that his father and grandfather built. I mean, basically that his grandfather fought his entire life to build, and the generations before his grandfather, and he forsook the counsel of those wiser than him, and he split the kingdom. He threw it all away. I mean, a side point to the sermon here is that, some people can't take counsel. I mean, that's an obvious side point from verse number 13 and also this story. Like father, like son. Some people can't take counsel. And look, that is, if you want to apply that to yourself, that is a disease that if you get that disease, it will drop you low. It will drop you low, and it will drop all under you low as well. God forbid the woman that marries a man that can't take counsel. Because especially young men, need counsel in this life. I think about just the times when I was a young man. I mean, look, I look back. I mean, a lot of you guys are young men, but I look back on my 20s and I'm just like, what was I thinking? Just the way I was thinking about things were completely different. And look, I think that the young men in this church are miles ahead of where I was in my 20s. But that being said, counsel is a good thing. And having this disease where you can't take counsel, it will drop you low, and it will drop everyone underneath you low as well. It'll drop your wife low, it'll drop your family low, it'll drop your children low. And it's a life sentence for some people. They just can't take counsel. All right, so look, being king doesn't automatically make you wise. All right? Point number 2 is this. Being king doesn't mean being king doesn't make you wise, point 1. And being king doesn't mean you will always be king. That's another, powerful point that we all need to learn. I mean, I remember my father-in-law. My father-in-law, I still remember this saying, and it's one of the, the funny memories I'll always have about him. But when we would be fishing or on some kind of adventure that we were on, we're either in a deer stand or we're hunting something or we're sitting on the lake shore, out on some camping trip or whatever, he would always say, he'd always kind of, lean over and just say, it's good to be the king. He'd say, what he means is life is good, right? That's what he's saying. He's what he meant by that is I appreciate this time. I mean, that's how men talk to each other. That's how a man says I appreciate this time I'm able to spend with you. It'd be weird if a guy you're hunting with be I really appreciate this time that we have together. That'd be weird. You're I got to get out of here. But instead, it's just it was just kind of a cool thing that he always said it's good to be the king. And what he meant was I really appreciate the opportunity to be able to do things like this, right? But here's the reality of it, when you literally in the Bible, it's not so great to be the king. If you look at the Bible, I mean, the king has a lot of travail in the Bible. And whether you look at the list of kings that I gave you a few weeks ago, just go and look at the kings and look at the dates on the reign of each king. In the lower kingdom of Judah, they had it a little bit better, but at the average role, Saul ruled 40 years, David 40 years, Solomon 40 years. But after that, it drops way down. The average rule of a king in Judah was 20 years, and then the northern kingdom of Israel was way worse. If you go and just average out the average reign of a king in the northern kingdom of Israel, it's 12 years, 12 and a half years, something like that. I mean, there's just, and look, it's not they're just it's 12 years, my time's up, and I'm just going to not be king anymore. No, it's just constant assassinations. It's dynasties, complete families just being replaced and wiping out the previous dynasty before them. I mean, thinking about being a king, literally being a king. Imagine a job where you're presented with this job. Here's this job. It's going to be great. And you're well, how long will I have the job? You're going to have the job for 12 years. It's going to be great. You're going to have you can do whatever you want, but after that, you're dead. I mean, who would take that job at that point, right? It's just you don't retire from being a king. You just die, right? That's how you end the career. That's how you end your 12-year career of being a king. And then, by the way, no one will remember you. So they're only going to remember the current king, all right? So the point is this, position, worldly power can be fleeting. It can be fleeting. All right? So look, I mean, as a young man, you tend to think this is something that you learn as you get a little bit older, but as a young man, you tend to think, and look, this doesn't come from a bad place, but you tend to think as a young man, like, things are only going to get better for me. Like, it's just always just going to be this constant ramp upwards. And I mean, look, the trajectory should be upwards in every area of your life, including, especially your Christian life. But the point is, like, worldly things are fleeting. Sometimes it's good and sometimes it's bad, right? If things are good, you're on top, you have to realize that, like, that's not always a guarantee as far as worldly position, worldly power. Worldly power and status is a fleeting thing. Okay? And look, just being successful doesn't mean that you will always be successful. You will have times when you're not successful. You will have times when maybe you're doing well at work. You will have times where maybe finances are good. Like, I can tell you right now that from a perspective, like from my perspective, from everyone I know and everyone I've, talked to and all these different things, I can tell you that 2025 has not been a great year as far as like from where if it's been great for you, I'm very happy. But as far as like, it's just one of those years that's just not been like super, great as far as, people's personal economy and things like that. But the point is there's good times and there's bad times. Things are fleeting, right? There's good years and there's bad years. I've talked about this a lot, right? So if you expect everything to just be on this constant upward trajectory and never be able to have a flat line or, something where you take a little dip somewhere or whatever, that's not going to be good because this worldly stuff is here and there. It's up and down, all right? Point number 3. So first point is being king doesn't automatically mean you're wise. Being in a leadership position doesn't just, you don't just magically get wisdom, all right? There's plenty of foolish people that are kings. There's plenty of foolish people that are in leadership positions. And God forbid, if you get in a leadership position, you would be that foolish person that doesn't take counsel. Point number 2 is that, being in a top position, a position of authority, in a worldly position of power, whatever that is, that can come and that can go. All right? As a matter of fact, the Bible says that the Lord promotes, right? The Lord promotes. So that's point number 2. Point number 3 is that no one's going to remember that worldly success. That's point number 3. That's fleeting too, right? And this is something that I've seen quite a bit. This is the guy that retires and just, I have seen people get ready to retire in my life, and I have thought, like, that guy's going to be in trouble when he retires. When that guy retires, nothing good is going to come of that. You say, why? It's because everything in his life was poured into that worldly identity, that worldly career, that worldly position that man had. It was everything, and they had nothing else, which is kind of what Ecclesiastes 4 is warning against. Look, then you can get people in a career that are like in a career. They're not retiring. They're in a career. They're in a job, and they start to get so involved in that. Look, I think you should do great at work. I think you should study. I think you should do as much as you can to get as skilled as you can. But you'll find people that'll get so intertwined into that career, that job, whatever it is, that they begin to think that they are irreplaceable in that job. And let me tell you something, nobody's irreplaceable. And that's why you see people that get, and I've seen this, look, it's not good to think that you aren't. And you're like, what? This is my life, this career, this job, whatever it is. Look, you should work hard. 1 Timothy 5:8, that thing. You should work hard. You should support your family. It's part of your duty as a Bible-believing Christian. But your family is the point there. The relationships are the point there. The wife that you're supporting and the children that you're supporting, they're the point there. The relationships are the point. See, this is where you see people that are laid off and they're just like, They're completely lost. They're completely devastated because they can't believe it. They're like, how could this place that needs me so much not, and all of a sudden they're just dropped directly on their face because they thought that they were this important, and the place that they thought that they were important to said you're not important at all. You see people that retire that are totally lost and just wander around. And many people you will find that retire, and I've seen this too, unfortunately, and they lose all purpose in their life. Because the relationship wasn't the purpose. The people weren't the purpose, the job was the purpose. It's like, no, the job, and work that job like you're working for Jesus Christ, but the job is just a means to support the relationships. See? Appreciate the job. Appreciate the job. Thank God every day that you can go to work. Go to work and do the best you possibly can at that job. You see, even Solomon as king, he's sitting here thinking like, no, he's getting ready to get out of the game. And he's like, no one's even going to care. It's like he's being laid off from being king. He's like, nobody's even going to care that I was king. Especially when he's kind of realizing that maybe he wasn't that good at that job. Maybe he didn't take the admonishment that he should have taken. See, these are generational lessons here. And these are, what do I mean by that? These are lessons that you see the elder generations make these mistakes and teach these lessons. That's why Ecclesiastes is so powerful. Because you can look at the older generations and see, and look, you can do that today. You can look at older generations today and you can say, okay, there's some things there that I don't want to happen to me, but that's going to be you one day in that position. You're going to be the older generation one day. And it's best to learn those lessons and get admonished by these generational lessons, or you'll fall into the same traps. And if you fall into the same traps, if you see people that are 40 or 50 years older than you, and you say, yeah, when I'm that age, I'm not going to make that mistake, and then you get to be that age, and then you are making that mistake, guess what? You're the old and foolish king. That's what that means. And this is why God wrote Ecclesiastes for us. So there could be one old and foolish king, and we don't all have to repeat those same footsteps. So that's the idea here, is that we learn these generational lessons and we don't repeat them ourselves. All right, so look, because of all this, turn to Colossians chapter number 3. Let's look at an overview of Ecclesiastes chapter number 4. All right, because of all of this, that there's going to be travail in life. There's going to be travail in life. The Bible is saying, don't spend it alone, build up some relationships, and don't spend it on fleeting things. Spend it on the right work, spend it on building relationships. Look at Colossians 3, look at verse number 1. The Bible says, if ye then be risen with Christ, seek those things, that's you by the way, seek those things which are above, where Christ sitteth on the right hand of God. And then it says, set your affections on things above, and not on things on the earth. And that's not just stuff, right? That's position and power and authority and all these things that are just as fleeting as the stuff, right? Look at Matthew chapter number 6. Look at Matthew chapter number 6. Matthew 6, look at verse 19. Jesus says, lay not up for yourselves treasures upon earth, where moth and rust doth corrupt, where thieves break through and steal. That's talking about stuff. But lay up for yourselves treasures in heaven, where neither moth nor rust doth corrupt, and where thieves do not break through nor steal. The New Testament is saying the exact same thing that Solomon is saying. He's just giving a practical example of his life and his lessons that he's learned. The Bible is just saying, focus on living a worthy life. Whether you be in power or not, look, whether you be in a good place right now or a bad place right now, guess what? When you're up, look, it's good to be in the bad place because then you know when you're in the good place. And then when you're in the good place, you can prepare for the day that you know that you'll be in the bad place. That's how you should handle the ups and downs. And you're like, I'm up right now, I better prepare for the down that's going to come eventually. Because you know it's coming. Because there's what? There's travail. There's travail in this life. And look, because there's travail, whether you do good or whether you do bad, there might even be more travail if you do the right work, as the Bible says. You might as well use your life to do things that have eternal value. Treasures in heaven. Using your life to spread the gospel. Treasures in heaven. Using your life, look, creating good relationships along the way. Make the travail worthwhile, is what the Bible is saying. Because guess what? Guess what's temporary? Guess what's temporary? You're like, my life. No, the travail's temporary. All the trouble, all the downs, all that is temporary. But the treasures in heaven, look, first of all, the first treasure in heaven to me is that I'll be there. I mean, I don't really need any more, but there's going to be more. You know, you'll be there, and if you spend your life in the right way, others will be there because you preach the gospel to them. And then on top of all that, God literally is going to give you treasures, like rewards in heaven. He's going to reward you for what you did here. And all of these things, that you'll be in heaven, that other people will be in heaven, that you're going to get rewards in heaven, all of those things are eternal. They're not 10 years or 20 years or whatever. They're forever. Look, but the world says, hold on to your pleasures, hold on to your money, hold on to your time, hold on to your comfortable life. That's what the world says. But all that stuff, what is pleasure that lasts for a moment compared to a treasure that lasts for eternity? I mean, what is money that dies with you compared to treasure that's laid up for you in heaven for eternity? I mean, this mission trip that's coming up, it's completely self-funded by everyone that's going. There's over 20 people going at this point, and there's no big powerful ministry paying for it. Look, people are taking their treasures and they're putting it into something that is going to last for eternity. And I mean, that's a really smart thing to do. People are taking temporal things and they're turning it into eternal things. Anything you give up for God is a trade up, not a trade down. That's how we have to look at it. Every paycheck is temporary. Every possession is temporary. Every burden is temporary. Every pain is temporary. Every achievement, every trophy, every promotion, every dream, everything that you do in this life is temporary. But some things have eternal ramifications. And those are the things that we need to focus on. I mean, your walk with God has eternal ramifications for you. The soul winning that you do, that's eternal. You go out and get somebody saved on Saturday, eternal. Your sacrifices that you give to the Lord, eternal. And God says that your reward is going to be eternal. So look, I mean, it comes down to, there's travail either way. There's travail either way in this life. But giving up something temporary to gain something eternal is the greatest trade in human history. That's Ecclesiastes chapter number 4. Let's bow our heads and have a word of prayer.